This is Real Life with Deb Waterbury, a real show for real people with real issues. And now, here's your host, Dr. Deb Waterbury.
Hello, welcome to Real Life with Deb Waterbury. We're beginning a brand new series this week that's going to go for 4 weeks. Now, we've had Bobbie and Bobbie Rill on the show before. They're grief specialists. We're going to talk a little bit about them and what they do here in a minute. But we've had them on before, and I love, Bobbie's been on the radio with me whenever I was doing radio stuff. We've known each other a long time. But we shared such amazing things, and y'all shared so many amazing things that we knew we wanted to do just a 4-week special where Bob and Bobbie are literally hitting different areas of grief. So for the next 4 weeks, that's what we've got. We're going to talk about, what grief is and just different symptoms of grief, everything that they think that you should know in the next 4 weeks, just overview, to let you know the basics of this and then how to kind of deal with those things. And then we'll give you all the information that you need that you can get in touch with them to have either counseling classes, individual counseling. We'll have all that information for you as well. So today, this is Bobbie Rill. Hey, Bobbie.
Hey, Deb.
And so we are going to start with today just the identifying what grief is. So first off, before we do that, Bobbie, if you'll just give us an overview of what you and your husband do, the name of the place that you guys are working, what it is that you do, so people know that.
Yes. Well, I've been a counselor for a long time, and it really began to be a passion on my heart to really find something that was much more effective in helping people deal with loss. And I found a process that is absolutely phenomenal.
Yes, it is.
Transforming lives and giving people hope. So started doing groups, became certified in the process, and actually studied under the developers of the grief recovery method.
Oh, very right, okay.
And then began to do groups in our community and started, of course, even in my church, doing the grief recovery groups.
Because it does work well through a church environment.
It really does.
Yes.
Now, I do want to clarify, it's not a faith-based program, which in some ways I'm really glad, because people, when they come into the group, they don't have to put on a mask as though everything in their relationship with God is hunky-dory.
Oh, wow. And that is really and truly, even as a biblical counselor, I have to get past that whole facade even to get through that. I can imagine dealing with grief, because everybody thinks there's the perfect way you're supposed to behave and the perfect things you're supposed to say within the Christian community, which is just a load of garbage. But still, people come to you with that. I suppose not being a faith-based thing helps with that.
That's absolutely right, Deb. And they also don't understand why, since they have fervently prayed for the healing of someone, and that prayer wasn't answered affirmatively.
Right.
And that person ends up dying. And so sometimes they can experience even a crisis of faith.
Right.
But the reason why I embrace this process is because it has the biblical principles in it.
It does.
That we all need.
It absolutely does. And that's what I have always been drawn to in this process that you do, Bobbie. And as you've talked about, like I said, on my radio show, you've been on this show before. It is so, and I've sent a lot of people to you.
Yes, you have. Thank you.
And even because I recognize, even as a counselor myself, there are areas that I know people need serious help that I can't give them, or that I can give them the superfluous parts of it, but I can't give them the real process for healing. And that's what you offer.
We do. And the program that we offer is got very concrete steps that people love, because when they're grieving, they're all over the place. That's one of the things they have difficulty with, is focusing and staying on track.
Yes.
And so we make it easier for them.
And I've heard that a lot from people who are in the midst of, I just lost my dad a few weeks ago. And even though I was very much at peace with that, because my dad's been sick for a long time, I'm watching my mother grieve. And in her grief process, there's been a lot of confusion and not even sure, and I can't even get her thoughts together often. It's been difficult. She's in Nashville, so I don't get to see it often, but when I talk to her, I can still tell that's an issue.
Absolutely. And in fact, we've been taught you either feel one way or the other. But what causes a lot of the confusion with grievers is that they're bombarded, Deb, with a number of different emotions simultaneously.
Yes, I know mamas have to even deal with relief.
Yes.
Because daddy was so sick. and that relief that he's gone home, because she knows he went to heaven, but just, then the guilt over feeling that relief.
That's right.
Yeah, and I know my brother had to do the same thing when his wife died, because she was so sick for so long.
Yes.
The guilt over feeling relief that she was gone.
And see, that's one of the key things that we help people understand, that oftentimes we're hard on ourselves, because they say, I feel so guilty that I feel this relief.
Right.
And I asked an attorney once, and I know this isn't really part of what, we're not in the
that's
program
okay.
yet.
It's okay.
But I asked an attorney once, what does the plea or the sentence of being guilty really mean when someone is standing in a court of law and that judge puts down the gavel and pronounces someone guilty? And Deb, it means one word.
What?
And the word is intent.
Oh.
The intent to do harm.
Wow.
And so right off the bat, we help people understand.
That's freedom right there, isn't it?
Yes.
Just in that one, that's total freedom right there.
So we help people to understand that it's not guilty.
Right.
Let's be kinder to yourself.
Right.
And use the word regret.
Yes, very good. That's so good. Okay, so I do want to get into this. You gave me some great questions. So this week, we're actually just talking about identifying grief. And what, because again, it is kind of an ambiguous term that we've thrown on some things that maybe aren't necessarily grief, but not thrown it on some things that are. And I think that's more likely what's happened. So first off, what actually is grief? When somebody tells you that they're grieving something, what does that mean? What is it?
Well, the very first thing that comes to most people's mind is death.
Right.
And certainly death is the most devastating thing that oftentimes a person relates to grief.
Right.
And so it's not uncommon that when we talk about grief, that's what they immediately think.
Of course.
And begin to consider, when you've lived with a person for years, whether that's a parent, a spouse, or a sibling, and all of a sudden they're gone.
Yes,
that
of course.
Death really hurts.
Right, of course. And I suppose that is truly our go-to. But then there's other kinds too, right? That we don't actually think about.
There most definitely is. And in fact, when you stop and think about what involves grief, it's not just a person who has died,
right,
even as devastating as that is, but also it can be a living person that is not meeting our expectations.
Oh. Wow.
I grieve the fact I thought my marriage was going to be different, or I thought this job was going to be different.
Oh, Bobbie, you just hit a whole population of people that were thinking, he's still alive. Why am I in grief?
Yes. And it's interesting because we joke around sometimes and they say, oh, you're giving me such grief.
Yes, right.
Actually, there's truth to that.
That's viable, isn't it?
That we say it is.
So our children, when we say they grieve us, they're really grieving us. It's truly grief because they're not living up to what or they're doing things or things have happened that we don't necessarily
That's correct.
have planned for.
That could be a child that breaks our heart or a teenager that gets in with the wrong group.
Right.
And it breaks our heart and we grieve that as we watch them make decisions that we know could really hurt them.
Yes. Well, so, okay, in that, how do you, when a person comes in to see you, how do you get to what kind of grief or, how you're going to help them? Because, there's no cookie cutter, I would imagine. I know there's a process.
Yes.
But everybody's different and everybody grieves differently.
Yes.
I mean, I noticed even in my own, recently with my daddy passing away, I grieve very differently than a lot of other people. And a lot of people have seen that they think I'm not grieving at all, but I am. I just do it differently. So how do you, how does your program then?
Well, Deb, that's such an important point that you make, that grief is so individual. That we all grieve differently and we have unique relationships with the person who maybe is the subject of our grief.
Right.
So if that's a death of a parent, we each had unique relationships with that particular parent.
Right.
And we also have unique relationships with our spouse.
Yes,
and because
and
of the
children.
relationship there, my grief, if I lost a spouse, would be different totally than someone else's.
I'm so glad you say that. And it would also be different than if you lost your child or you lost a parent or you lost a grandparent.
Yes.
It really is dependent on the relationship between. That's really good.
Well, and because it's so individual, people have a misunderstanding in regards to this, because I'll receive phone calls that say, I need a grief recovery group for those who have lost a child.
Right.
Thinking that if they get into that type of grief, these people are going to know exactly what I'm going through.
When the reality is they might not need to be in that kind of group at all, because they really actually just need grief, processing through their grief, right?
Well, yes, because grief is accumulative.
Yes.
And all through, beginning with life experiences, we experience hurts and disappointments and losses that haven't always been identified as grief. And so we can maybe have loss of that safety or that trust, and that because of a betrayal, or that we experience a number of different hurts, and our expectations aren't met at a particular job or relationship. And so we grieve all these things. But the important thing about when they think they go into a recovery group for a particular loss,
right,
is that these people are going to understand, and frankly, they don't. Right. Because you take the loss of a child, and one might be a miscarriage.
Right.
One might be a child that got hit by the school bus at age 6. Another one might be a son that died at 45 while he was working on his car that collapsed on him.
Or
one may be a suicide.
Yes, right.
There are just so many, again, very individual aspects to grief.
Right.
We really want you to understand that your grief is unique.
Yes,
and no one else knows what you're feeling or going through.
That's really good. And I think it's good because we have to recognize that there is no cookie cutter, but that there is hope.
Yes, and there is a process.
Yes.
I think, Deb, I've told you that I looked for years to find something.
Which is why I trust you so much, because you definitely did your homework.
Yes, I did, because I wasn't happy with what I learned
because you started out doing it the regular.
program.
You started out learning in the kind of regular 5 stages of grief, and that's where you started, right?
That's what all medical professionals and mental health care counselors have all been taught, is Dr. Kubler Ross's 5 stages of grief. And her work was outstanding, but it was never on grievers. Her work was done on those who had received a terminal diagnosis.
Really?
They knew they were going to die, and her work was focused on death and dying, not on the survivors, not on grief.
Wow. I mean, that's a big wow.
It is a big wow.
You don't want to say it invalidates it, but it certainly puts it in a category all into itself that doesn't necessarily apply to the way we've applied it.
Not all of the stages do. Now, some of the stages people do, and frankly, we as professionals, and I'm speaking as myself as a counselor, for years tried to make those 5 stages work.
Right.
And we tried to convince our clients that you might go back and forth in these stages, but you will get to that 5th stage of accepting it.
Right.
But I tell you what, I was frustrated looking for something that would have much more power in the individuals' lives with whom I worked.
Yes. And so you landed on this grief recovery program, isn't it?
Yes.
And so what distinguishes it from the others?
Yeah, it works.
Which is a big one.
That's probably the most concise statement, because I could begin to tell you example after example of the people who have gotten hope again, and know that they can love again and laugh again without the pain of unresolved grief in their life.
That's hopeful.
It is so freeing and so hopeful.
Yes,
like you said.
Praise the Lord. I can't see this one question. Oh yeah, we talked about that. I want to make sure we talk about everything.
Yeah. Okay.
In this one, so in the whole idea of what is grief.
Yeah.
I mean, and what I love what you just said, and I would like to end here, where we move into so many areas of, even in what I do as a teacher, biblical counselor, I've had to realize it's about hope.
Yes.
And unless you get to a process that works, that involves hope, and that actually you see there's an actual result, then the process you're in is not working.
Yes.
unless you're at one. And I mean, that's why I became a biblical counselor, because the Bible works. There are answers,
Yes.
and so that's where we go. And and the grief recovery program works. There are answers, and that's where you go, because there's hope, and there's hope in that, which is why I love talking to Bobbie. You know, I've had so many times, even talking to you before, on shows where I feel like I'm being counseled because I need it so badly, that things that I haven't even identified as grief, that I didn't identify, you know, times in my life where I was betrayed, or and the pain I went through afterwards is actually grief, and moving through that. And then if you never deal with that, then as you said, it is accumulative.
Yes.
And it'll show up again, doesn't it?
It does.
And worse.
Because it does affect us. It'll affect our life and our relationships.
Yes.
And we're going to talk more about that as we go through this
yes,
series.
We are. So we've got so much ahead.
But I will tell you this too, when we talk about what is grief, right now we've talked a lot in our country about post-traumatic stress disorders.
Yes, right.
And trauma. That is grief. And we have found that the process is very effective in working through trauma, whether that trauma is a crisis of any kind, whether it's a rape or incest and abuse that has happened, or even military is where we really think of PTSD, the post-traumatic stress disorder, and that's where it was first identified. But now we know that any crisis or trauma that a person can experience, you will experience grief with that.
Gosh, that makes so much sense, Bobbie. And what a again, a hopeful thing to know there is an answer. And there are people who can help you through these things. It does not require, you know, all the medication and all the psychiatrists. It requires a process from a person who can guide you through, like Bobbie and her husband, Bob. So the name of your center is?
The Grief and Wellness Group.
And how do they get in touch with you?
I've got a telephone number that you can call, and that number is 520-668-5906. Again, that's 520-668-5906.
And we'll have that information underneath here as well, along with our websites and all the information that you'll need, and we'll have that each week. We really I hope that you guys are going to do some comments below here. If you have some questions, we'll make sure Bobbie gets those. And join us for the next couple of weeks, because I'm going to tell you right now, these people have got wisdom to impart, and it will be wisdom that brings hope. And there's just nothing better than that, to know that you have hope.
Thank you.
Yes.
And our website is griefthethief.com.
I love that.
It robs you if you don't get the help.
Grief the Thief, is that all one word?
Yes.
Grieftethief.com. I dig that. That's a pretty cool website. Okay, well, we'll see you guys next week, or to continue in this grief series. Thank you so much, Bobbie.
Thank you, Deb.
I'll see y'all later. Have a good week.
Thank you for joining me today on this episode of Real Life with Deb Waterbury. I hope it's been a blessing to you as much as it was to me. You know, if you want any of my books or information on articles or any of my speaking engagements, you can go to my website at debwaterbury.com. God bless you.